The first thing I heard was the click. Soft, metallic, deliberate. It came from somewhere beyond the iron gate, a neat little sound in the dark that made my whole body stop before my mind caught up. The dawn hadn't broken yet. The citrus trees along the drive were only darker shadows against a charcoal sky, and the gravel under my shoes felt too loud, too exposed, too final. I had stolen the keys from a hook near the kitchen door. I had memorized which hallway board creaked. I had wrapped my phone in a dish towel so it wouldn't clatter against the lock when I moved. I had counted my breaths all the way from the guest room where they had put me, as if fresh linens and heavy curtains could disguise a prison. I had done everything right. Then the gate opened inward 2 inches, and Dante Salvator stood on the other side as if the night itself had folded into the shape of a man. He wore a dark coat over a black shirt, no tie, no hurry. The ember at the end of his cigarette glowed once, then died when he lowered it. In his other hand was a silver lighter. He flicked it shut with his thumb and looked at me through the bars like he had known the exact minute I would come. Going somewhere, my throat tightened. Move. His gaze dropped to the keys in my hand, then returned to my face. Not amused, not angry, worse, certain. It's not safe outside these gates. You locked me in. I kept you alive. The words landed between us, flat and impossible. Hours earlier I had been in my father's bakery, sliding trays of almond pastries onto cooling racks while the city still slept. By midnight there had been gunfire in the front room, broken glass in the cannoli case, and a man in an expensive coat stepping over blood like it was rainwater. Dante had looked at the body by my counter, then at me, then at my brother's empty office in the back and said, "Take her." Not roughly, not gently, like an instruction already overdue. Now here he was in the dark, waiting at the one exit I had left. "Where is Nico?" I asked. A muscle moved in his jaw, still breathing. It should have relieved me. It didn't. "That isn't an answer. It's the only one you get right now." I hated how calm he sounded. Hated more that calm worked on me. His stillness had weight. It made panic feel childish. I tightened my grip on the keys. "You don't get to decide what answers I deserve." "No." He took one step closer to the gate. "Then decide if you'd rather be angry at me inside my walls or dead outside them." I should have told him to go to hell. I should have thrown the keys at his face. I should have done anything except notice the cold in the air around him, or the faint scent of smoke and bergamot, and something darker that lived in the wool of his coat. Instead I heard another sound, a low, wet breath. I turned. Paolo, the younger guard from the kitchen corridor, the one with the crooked nose and kind eyes he tried to hide, was sitting against the stone wall 3 feet from the gate. One hand pressed clumsily to his side. His shirt was black, but not black enough to hide what had soaked through it. Blood. For one stunned second, the world narrowed to that color. Not the villa, not the gate, not Dante. Blood and a man trying not to make noise. My feet moved before the rest of me decided anything. I dropped to my knees in the gravel beside Paolo, ignoring the sharp bite through my stockings, and pulled his hand away. He made a sound between a laugh and a groan. "Miss Belly, be quiet." My voice came out too fast, too familiar, too much like another morning, another floor, another pair of hands going cold under mine. "You're pressing the wrong place." I looked around wildly, found nothing useful, then tore the sash from my robe and folded it hard against the wound. Blood spread through the white cotton at once, hot even in the cold. "Breathe," I whispered. Paolo stared at me. "You were escaping." "I know." "Then why?" "Because you're bleeding." "Breathe." His breath hitched. I pressed harder. The gravel shifted behind me. I didn't look up, but I knew Dante had moved. I could feel a tension like heat between my shoulder blades. "Giulia," he said quietly. A light snapped on in the house behind us. Somewhere a door opened, footsteps, but he was still there when I finally lifted my head, still watching. His cigarette burned untouched between 2 fingers, and something had changed in his face. Not softness. He wasn't built for softness. But the emptiness I had first mistaken for indifference had cracked by a line so small I almost thought I imagined it. "You should have run," he said. My hands were red to the wrists. "I tried." His mouth shifted. Barely. Not a smile. Something more dangerous because it almost became one and didn't. Then his gaze moved to the horizon, where the first thin line of gray had begun to gather. "Alba," he said. I frowned. "What?" He looked back at me. "You keep choosing Dawn." I didn't know if it was a joke, an insult, or the beginning of something worse. Giulia arrived then, wrapped in a shawl over practical clothes, carrying a metal case. She knelt beside Paolo with the speed of long practice. Behind her came two more men with weapons under their coats and sleep nowhere in their faces. Dante held out his hand. I stared at it. "The keys," he said. For one childish second, I considered closing my fist and making him take them. Then I looked at Paolo, at the blood under my nails, at the men on the drive who answered to the man in front of me without needing him to raise his voice. I looked at the open gate and felt, with a kind of sick clarity, how little open really meant. I put the keys in his palm. His fingers closed, warm, brief, absolute. "Back inside," he said. "I'm not your prisoner." "No," his eyes held mine. "You're my problem." The words should have humiliated me. Instead, they lodged under my skin. He stepped aside and let the gate swing shut between us. The iron met stone with a sound like a verdict. Then he slid the lock into place himself, the silver lighter glinting once as dawn crept over the grove. One door had closed. I woke to the smell of butter browning. For one merciful second, still tangled in unfamiliar sheets, I thought I was above the bakery again. I thought Papa would already be downstairs cursing the old mixer, and Nico would be asleep on the flour sacks because he swore the office chair hurt his back. I thought if I hurried, I could save the first batch of cornetti before the bottoms caught. Then I opened my eyes to a ceiling painted with pale saints and remembered I had been kidnapped by a man who wore silence like a weapon. The villa was too beautiful to trust. Marble floors. High windows, walls thick enough to turn every sound into a secret. Even the quiet felt expensive. Outside my door, footsteps passed at measured intervals, men pretending not to guard me. I dressed in yesterday's clothes and followed the butter smell down 2 flights of stairs and through a corridor lined with old oil portraits of dead salvators glaring at me like I had arrived. Without an invitation. Which, to be fair, I had. The kitchen was huge, bright, and warm in a way the rest of the house refused to be. Copper pots hung above a stone island. Lemons filled a bowl big enough to bathe a child in. At the far stove stood a round woman in black with silver hair twisted into a knot so severe it might have cut glass. She turned before I could speak. "If you faint, do it away from my bread." I blinked. "I'm not going to faint." "Good, then wash your hands." This, apparently, was Maria. I obeyed because the sink was there, and because normal actions felt like the only small country left to me. The water ran hot over my wrists. I watched pink dilute down the drain where Paolo's blood had dried in the lines of my skin. When I looked up, another man had appeared in the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, 30 maybe, with a face too handsome to be trustworthy and the tragic expression of someone attending his own funeral. He sniffed the air dramatically. "Maria." "If that is ricotta fritta, you are sabotaging me." Maria didn't look at him. "If you had discipline, Nino, I would have no work to do." "I have discipline. What I lack is reward for suffering." She pointed the spoon at him like a knife. "Last night you ate 6 almond biscuits while telling me sugar is poison." "It is poison." "Delicious, holy poison." His gaze landed on me, he straightened. "Ah, the hostage." "I'm not a hostage," I said automatically. Nino lifted one dark eyebrow. "That answer usually means yes." Maria smacked his arm with the spoon. He clutched his chest like a theater actor and turned to me again with exaggerated dignity. "Nino Rosso," he said. "Driver. Logistics, occasional victim." "Of what?" He glanced at Maria. "Unreturned devotion and saturated fats." To my surprise, the laugh escaped before I could stop it. Small, quick, wrong in this house. But Nino caught it and bowed as if I had gifted him applause. "There," he said, "proof I still serve a higher purpose." A presence filled the doorway behind him and the room changed. It wasn't loud. Dante didn't announce himself. He simply entered, and Maria stopped stirring for a fraction of a second. Nino shifted aside without being told. Even the kitchen clock seemed to tick more carefully. Dante's gaze found me at once. He had changed into a charcoal suit, no tie again, sleeves buttoned precisely at the wrists. He looked less like a man who ran half the port and more like the reason people disappeared from it. "You slept," he said. I dried my hands on a towel. "Did you stand outside my door to verify?" "No." "I had work." The answer was so dry it almost felt like one of Nino's jokes, except Dante didn't look like he knew jokes existed. Maria set an espresso in front of him. He nodded once. She returned to her stove. I folded my arms. "Then maybe you can explain why armed men are pretending this is hospitality. Because armed men standing openly would offend you. I'm already offended." His eyes moved over my face, not unkindly. "Not kindly either." "Measuring, you can have the east gardens, the kitchen, the library, and the chapel courtyard," he said. "Not the gates, not the garages, not the west wing. If you need something, ask Giulia or Maria. If someone you don't know speaks to you, walk away. If you see Tommaso, be polite. Should that comfort me? No. It should keep you alive." Nino muttered toward the bread basket. "He says good morning like a tax collector." Dante did not look at him. "Have you weighed yourself yet?" Nino's offended gasp was so immediate Maria had to turn away to hide a smile. I stared at Dante. "You expect me to follow rules without telling me why I'm here. You're here because your brother went missing with information that could start a war." My stomach tightened. "Nico is a bookkeeper. Your brother is many things." Something in the way he said it unsettled me more than if he had raised his voice. It suggested history I had not been invited into. "Then tell me where he is." "No," the word was calm, simple, final. Anger flashed so hot my hands shook. "You don't own the truth." "No," he took a sip of espresso. "But I own the time in which you hear it." That was the first moment I truly understood him. Not the guns, not the guards, not even the gate. Control. Everything about him was built around control, so absolute it had swallowed the need to show it. I hated that a part of me respected it. Maria slid a plate toward me, bread, figs, soft cheese. "Eat, I'm not hungry." "Then chew out of spite." Nino nodded solemnly. "Spite burns calories, I've researched this." Against all reason, I sat. Dante finished his espresso and set the cup down with exact care. His hand brushed the silver lighter beside it, though he didn't pick it up. "Your bakery is closed," he said. "My men secured it before sunrise." Pain went through me so fast I felt it in my teeth. "You had no right. Rights are for clean worlds. I had orders. They'll wait. You don't know that." "No," he said, "but I know dead bakers lose customers faster." Silence spread. He rose. Nino rose with him, a reflex. At the door Dante paused and looked back at me. "Do not try the gate again, Alba." There it was, that word, not my name, not a kindness, a mark. "I'm not calling you anything," I said. "You don't need to." His gaze held mine 1 second too long. "I already answer." Then he left, and the room seemed to exhale around his absence. I looked down at the bread in my hand and realized I had crushed the crust without taking a bite. Maria sighed. "You should have eaten before arguing." Nino leaned against the counter like a confessor with bad habits. "For what it's worth, he looks worse when he doesn't sleep." "Does that happen often?" I asked. Nino's humor dimmed. "Since Bianca, yes." The name landed strangely. Before I could ask, Maria snapped, "Enough." Nino rubbed the back of his neck. "See." Victim, but when I glanced toward the doorway where Dante had vanished, the plate in front of me tasted suddenly like surrender. I ate anyway. By the time I swallowed the last bite, I understood something I had not wanted to. I had not been brought here to be convinced. I had been brought here to be kept. By the third day, I knew the villa by sound. The west corridor sighed in the afternoons because the old windows never sealed properly. The chapel bell rang twice at noon, though no one seemed to pray. Men's shoes changed pitch on marble when they were armed. Maria sang under her breath only when she needed bread, never when she chopped. And Dante's silver lighter clicked before I ever saw him. Not always with a cigarette. Sometimes just once, sharp and contained, as if the sound itself held some private function. A signal, a leash, a prayer. I tried not to listen for it. I failed often. That morning, I stood at the long kitchen table rolling out pastry dough, because my hands would not stop shaking unless they were doing something honest. Maria had surrendered a corner of her kingdom to me with ill grace and precise instructions. If you cry into the custard, use less salt later. I'm not crying. Good. Then your dough is too warm. I was halfway through a tray of orange cream sfogliatelle when Giulia entered with a basket of linens, and a look that could have turned softer if life had not trained it. Out of her. He wants you in the library after lunch, she said. Who? She gave me a long stare. Right, I muttered. The king. Her mouth twitched once. No crowns here. Only consequences. After she left, I dusted more flour over the board and pretended the words didn't stay with me. Nico had taught me how to hide money in bad months by folding bills into parchment sleeves inside the sugar tin. He said banks were for men who liked being watched. After lunch, with Maria distracted by a delivery and Nino outside, arguing with a produce vendor about the moral corruption of seed oils, I found myself in the pantry on instinct alone. The sugar tin sat where it always would have in our own bakery, high shelf, blue enamel chipped at the rim. I almost smiled. Maria had the same one. Inside, beneath 2 clean cloth sacks of sugar, lay a leather notebook. My chest seized. Nico, I whispered. It was our father's recipe book. Thick, worn, corners darkened by years of buttered fingers and steam. The sight of it in this house felt so intimate I had to steady myself against the shelf. I opened it. Cannoli shells. Pistachio cream, orange peel syrup, the old handwriting I knew better than my own, and in the margins numbers, tiny, slanted, repeated beside delivery quantities and baking times. At first I thought they were Nico's inventory notes. Then I saw the pattern, dates that didn't match seasons, measurements that exceeded any kitchen I'd ever worked in. Code. My brother had hidden code in Papa's recipes. A floorboard sounded behind me. I turned too fast, clutching the notebook to my chest. Dante stood in the pantry doorway, large enough to steal the light. For a second neither of us spoke. Then his eyes dropped to the leather in my arms. So he left it with you. You knew. I suspected. You let me find it like this. I wanted to see whether you'd bring it to me. Something hot and ugly rose inside me. I am not one of your men. No, his voice stayed maddeningly even. They lie better. I should have slapped him. Instead, I shoved the notebook at him. Take it. He didn't. His gaze stayed on my face. Did you know what your brother was carrying? No. Do you know who he meant to expose? No. The second no came out thinner, because I did know one thing. A week ago, Nico had stood in my bakery office with flour on his coat and terror badly hidden under a grin. He had kissed my forehead and said, "If anyone asks, you haven't seen me." Especially if the man asking is polite. At the time I had thought he meant police, debt collectors, some stupid mess with cards, not this. I didn't know, I said again, and hated how much I needed him to believe it. Dante reached out then, slowly enough that I could have moved away. His fingers brushed the notebook first, then mine. Warm, calloused, too careful, I let go as if I had touched a live wire. He opened the book, turned 3 pages, and stopped at the fig tart recipe. These numbers correspond to container roots. I stared. How can you tell? Because I've spent 2 months bleeding money through one of them. Something in his expression hardened, but not at me. Beyond me, the pantry felt too small suddenly, too close. Flour dust floated in the slice of sunlight between us like breath held too long. What does it mean? I asked. It means your brother found something he shouldn't have. It means someone inside my house is feeding shipments to men who want my ports. He shut the notebook. And it means you are more valuable than I wanted you to be. The words should have frightened me more than they did. Maybe I was getting used to being afraid. Maybe there were levels to fear, and I had already stepped past the shallow ones. I want to help. Dante's eyes flicked to mine, unreadable. No, I can read Nico's notes. I know how he thinks. I said no. Why? Because I'm inconveniently alive. Because if they learn you can decode this, they will cut you open looking for what you know. The air changed after that sentence. So slight I might have missed it if I weren't already standing too near him. He regretted the image the instant it left his mouth. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened. I can handle truth, I said quietly. That doesn't make me want to hand it to you. We stared at each other in the narrow pantry, with my father's notebook between us, and something else building under the anger. Something worse because neither of us wanted to name it. His hand was still near mine. If I moved 2 inches, maybe less, I could touch him. Instead, Maria's voice rang down the corridor. Nino, if you steal mozzarella again, I'll tell Father Luca about your browser history. Nino shouted back, scandalized. It was 1 cheese, woman. Not a felony. The tension broke so hard I almost swayed with it. Dante stepped back first. Library, he said. 1 hour, then he turned and left. I stood alone in the pantry, breathing sugar and leather and my own confusion, until the hall noise returned and the room remembered it was only a room. Dante stood by the library window when she entered an hour later, the notebook open on his desk, and the port spread beneath him in figures and doubt. He had known the moment she knelt beside Paolo that she was dangerous to him, not because she ran. Anyone with sense would run, because she stopped, flour on her sleeves, fear in her face. Hands steady anyway. In his world, mercy was either a weakness or a performance. Hers had been instinct, and instinct was harder to defend against. When he heard the door behind her close, he flicked the silver lighter shut and put it away before she could see his hand tighten around it. Someone was already moving against them. The first time Dante took me outside the villa, it was because I insulted his tomatoes. That wasn't how the argument began, but it was how Nino later told it, and once he said it that way no one, including Maria, seemed interested in preserving the dignity of the truth. The truth was that I had been trapped in the villa for 5 days, and on the 6th I discovered the produce delivered to the kitchen was unworthy of life. The basil bruised too easily. The ricotta tasted refrigerated instead of fresh. The blood oranges were good, but not good enough. You notice things that offend me, Maria said, after I rejected a crate of peaches with sincere disgust. This is promising. I notice because I work with flavor. You notice because you are impossible. Nino, eating olives straight from a dish while pretending he wasn't snacking before lunch. Nodded at me. A family trait, apparently. When Dante appeared in the kitchen doorway and asked why 2 crates had been refused, I should but Maria answered for me. She says any man who buys winter tomatoes in June deserves prison. Nino put a hand over his heart. At last, a woman of moral clarity. Dante looked from Maria to me. Do you? Yes. His gaze sharpened as if he wasn't used to people answering him with a single clean blade. Then come, where? To buy tomatoes that won't offend you. Maria made a dismissive noise that somehow sounded approving. Nino brightened instantly. Excellent. I'll drive. You'll carry crates, Maria corrected. He looked personally wounded. This is why our love suffers. It suffers because you flirt with focaccia. That should have ended it. In another life it would have. Instead, an hour later, I sat in the back of a black sedan with Dante beside me, Nino up front mourning the death of his low-carb principles. And 2 armed men in the car behind us, as Palermo slid, past in a wash of pale stone, and hanging laundry and scooters that seemed to obey no earthly law. I had not been outside the villa since the night they took me. I hadn't realized how much my body remembered freedom until the city air hit my lungs through the cracked window. Diesel, salt. Hot bread, the distant rot of the harbor, church bells flattening into the noon heat. I closed my eyes for 1 second too long. When I opened them, Dante was already watching me. You miss it, he said. That's a strange thing to ask someone you're keeping. It wasn't a question. Nino, from the front seat, offered helpfully, if it makes you feel better, I also feel trapped. Mostly by expectations. And trousers. Drive, Dante said. The market spread across a square near the old quarter under striped awnings and a riot of voices. Sicilians spilled from stall to stall, fast and musical, interrupted by the slap of fish on ice and the crackle of paper bags. The moment Dante stepped out, the closest men straightened. A conversation died halfway through a laugh. No one announced him. They didn't need to. Power had a sound. Sometimes it was silence. He came around the car before I could reach for the handle. His hand closed over the door frame above me, caging without touching. Stay close. I'm perfectly capable of Alba. Just that, quiet, economical, a warning and an instruction in one word. I looked up at him and hated the way my pulse changed. Then I stepped out. We moved through the market like a storm pretending to be weather. Dante never touched me, but I always knew where he was. Half a pace to my left, slightly behind when crowds thickened, between me and every man who let his eyes linger too long. Nino carried 2 baskets and complained in a steady murmur. Tomatoes, basil, cheese, this is not logistics, this is peasant suffering. Be grateful, Dante said. Maria wanted olive oil too. Nino stopped dead. Then why are we not at church praying? I bit the inside of my cheek to stop a smile. Dante saw. I knew he saw because his gaze flicked to my mouth and away again, fast enough to pretend it hadn't happened. A woman at a produce stall handed me a tomato still warm from the sun. I lifted it, smelled the stem, pressed lightly at the base. Dante's voice came near my ear. Well, this one lived an honorable life. Nino snorted so hard he nearly dropped an aubergine. Dante said, high praise. I turned to answer and walked straight into a man moving too fast. The impact jolted my shoulder. His hand caught my elbow before I could stumble, fingers clamping harder than the crowd required. Sour wine rolled off him. He grinned with half a mouth and no charm. "Scusi, Bella." "I'm fine," I said, trying to pull free. His grip tightened. Dante moved. There was no dramatic burst of rage, no shouted threat. 1 second the stranger had my arm, and the next Dante's hand was around his wrist, twisting just enough that the man dropped me with a strangled sound. The square seemed to inhale. "Let go," the man hissed. Dante did not look at him, he looked at me. "Did he hurt you?" "No." Only then did he turn back. "Then this is your lucky day." The words were soft. The man went pale anyway. Nino stepped forward with the resigned face of someone who had seen this problem before. "Friend," he said to the stranger, "I'm begging you as a man trying to reduce workplace violence. Apologize beautifully." The stranger yanked once against Dante's grip and lost all color when he realized he couldn't move him. "I said scusi." Dante released him so suddenly the man staggered backward. For one terrible second I thought it was over. Then the stranger's hand darted under his jacket. Everything after that happened inside the space of one breath. Dante shoved me backward into the stone wall of a shuttered shop. His body turned with mine, one arm braced beside my head, the other reaching under his coat. I heard the scrape of a weapon clearing leather, heard shouts, Nino cursing with religious creativity. The stranger's knife flashed once in the market light. Dante caught his wrist. The knife clattered away. Then Dante's hand was at the man's throat, not choking, not yet, just holding, efficiently. With a stillness more frightening than fury. His thumb rested beneath the jaw in a way that said he knew exactly how much pressure it would take. My back met rough stone. The market blurred at the edges. All I could really see was Dante's shoulder in front of me and the stranger's face changing by the second. "Please," the man rasped. Dante leaned in. "You reached for steel in front of her." The stranger made a broken sound. Nino murmured, "And there goes my afternoon." I should have looked away. I didn't. That was the worst part, not the violence. Not exactly. It was how little motion Dante needed to make the world obey him. His free hand found the silver lighter in his pocket. He flicked it once. Click. A clean metallic sound in the charged hush. Then he tucked it away again, as if reminding himself of something. Maybe reminding himself not to kill this man in front of me. When he released him at last, the stranger dropped to his knees gagging. "Go," Dante said. The man went just like that. No theater, no lesson delivered to the crowd, only consequence. Nino bent to retrieve the fallen knife, inspected it with comic disappointment, and slid it into his own waistband. "Cheap steel," he announced. If you're going to threaten us, have standards. People laughed then. Nervous, thin, grateful, Dante turned back to me. His hand came up to my throat before I understood what he was doing. Not around it, beneath my jaw, 2 fingers checking my pulse where it beat too fast. The touch was brief, clinical, ruining. "Look at me," he said. I was already looking. His eyes searched my face with a focus that felt almost intimate, and something old moved beneath it. A memory maybe, or fear so disciplined it had learned to wear another name. "I'm fine," I whispered. His fingers lingered 1 second too long. That was the almost. Then he stepped back. We bought the tomatoes anyway. The drive home was quieter. Nino talked for everyone, because otherwise the silence would have become a 4th passenger. "I maintain," he said, "that if Maria loved me properly, she would appreciate how often I risk death for cheese." From the seat beside him, Paolo, patched up and pale but stubbornly back on duty, said, "If she loved you properly, she'd poison you faster." "Traitor," Nino said. Paolo caught my eye in the rearview mirror and smiled faintly. I smiled back before I could stop myself. At the villa, I carried the tomatoes into the kitchen, and Maria inspected them like a bishop accepting relics. When she dismissed everyone else, I stayed to make crostata because my hands needed somewhere to put the leftover tremor. I made it without deciding to. Bitter dark chocolate in the base. Orange cream above it, a sponge sugar shell on top so thin it would shatter under the back of a spoon. Maria watched in silence until I finished. "What do you call it?" she asked. I looked at the tart. At the glossy shell hiding the softer thing beneath. "Don't wait before dawn," I said. She gave me a long, unreadable look. Later, when the kitchen emptied, I cut 1 slice and set it aside. I told myself it was because waste offended me. An hour after that, I heard the click of the silver lighter outside the pantry door, and knew exactly who had come for it. He ate the tart in my father's office. I knew it was my father's office, because the room had once belonged to a man who believed in accounts and order, and then, later, to my brother who believed in locked drawers and lies told gently. The villa's study had been remade to hold Dante's war, shipping maps, port ledgers. Photographs clipped under brass weights, but the desk was still the same old walnut scarred by years of rings from espresso cups. I stood in the doorway with the empty serving plate in my hand and watched him take the second bite. He looked up without surprise. "You're staring. It's rude to speak with your mouth full." One corner of his mouth moved. "Then I won't say much." The silver lighter sat near his elbow, open notebook. Half-burned cigarette untouched in the tray. He had come here for numbers and ended up with my tart, which should not have mattered to me as much as it did. "Did Maria tell you what it's called?" I asked. "She said if I asked, she'd charge me for the answer." "That sounds like Maria." His gaze dropped to the slice again. "What's under the shell?" "Orange cream. And under that, chocolate, bitter, yes." He set the fork down with care. "Appropriate. I should have left then." Instead, I stepped farther into the room. "Appropriate for what?" "For someone who hides knives in sugar." The answer struck too close. I folded my arms. "You make it sound criminal. In this house, skill usually is." On the desk between us lay my father's recipe book. Open to the page Nico had marked with docking times, hidden beside the lemon zest ratio. I had spent 3 evenings working through the pattern with Dante across from me, translating kitchen shorthand into cargo routes, while Nino brought espresso and made dramatic predictions about our deaths. It should have felt like cooperation. It mostly felt like standing too near a cliff and learning to like the view. "There's another code line here," I said, reaching for the book. "This number repeats in the pastry timings." My sleeve brushed his hand. Barely, enough. The pause that followed was tiny, merciless. I drew back first. He let me. Another almost. The route I found was not a route at all but a date, and the date led to a warehouse by the eastern docks that Dante's men swore had been empty for months. By the time sunset painted the harbor copper, the house had changed shape around the discovery. Men moved faster. Phones stopped ringing before the first full tone. Even the staff lowered their voices. "Stay upstairs tonight," Giulia told me while she pinned back her hair with one hand and checked the magazine of a pistol with the other. I stared. You're armed, she gave me a look so dry it nearly cracked. Only on holy days. The first shot came after midnight, not at the villa, at the docks. A call over the radio, then 2 more. Dante was gone before anyone told me so. I knew from the silence he left behind. I tried to stay in my room. I lasted 11 minutes. The kitchen light was on. Maria stood at the long table, chopping parsley with the calm of a woman who had long ago accepted that men would bleed and still require dinner. Nino paced near the stove in a black suit with a vest stretched heroically across his middle. You're dressed, I said. He spread his arms. If I die, I refuse to look casual. Maria handed me a bowl. Stir, what is happening? What always happens, she said. Men ruin good nights. Nino leaned in as if sharing gossip. Boss found something at the warehouse, or someone found him first. Hard to say, very rude either way. Fear moved through me clean and cold. I stirred harder than the sauce required. An hour later, the back door burst open. Paolo came in first, blood at his hairline and fury in his walk. 2 others followed carrying a man between them whose shirt was soaked dark at the shoulder. Then Dante entered, not bleeding. Not visibly, but the room bent around him as if the violence had followed him in. His gaze found me at once, standing stupidly with a wooden spoon in my hand. You were told to stay upstairs. I know, so you disobeyed. I was making sauce. Nino muttered to Paolo, romance in this house is very confusing. No one laughed, but I almost did. That was Nino's gift. He could wedge humanity into cracks where it had no business surviving. The wounded man sagged against the table. Giulia cut his shirt open. Bullet through, she said. Need pressure? I moved before anyone asked. Towels, clean cloth, alcohol. My body knew kitchens and emergencies too well to separate them. Dante watched me work beside Giulia. At one point, our hands reached for the same bandage and stopped with our fingers a breath apart. Another almost. My pulse noticed. I hated that. The wounded man lived. At 3 in the morning, when the kitchen had emptied except for me and Dante and the scrape of rain beginning against the windows, I found him alone by the sink rinsing blood from his hands. For one ridiculous second, all I could think of was my father washing berry stains off his fingers after summer tarts. You were shot at, I said softly. He did not look up. Frequently, that isn't funny. I wasn't joking. The water ran red, then pink, then clear. I stepped closer. Did you find who betrayed the warehouse? He shut off the tap. No, but you know someone did. Yes, I didn't think before I reached for the dish towel and took his wrist. He went very still. The room followed. There was blood dried near his cuff where a graze had cut through the skin. Small, ugly, hidden. You're hurt. It's nothing. It's your arm. I'm aware of its location. Despite everything, a breath of laughter escaped me, tired, frayed. He looked at me then, and the air changed. I wrapped the towel around the cut to clean it. His skin was warm. His forearm flexed once under my fingers and settled. He could have pulled away. He didn't. Who taught you this? He asked. My father baked, my brother collected injuries, I learned. That explains the hands. I glanced up. What hands? The ones that keep moving toward blood. There it was again, that look. That knowing that felt impossible because I hadn't given it permission. I swallowed. Someone had too. For a moment, his face did something dangerous. It opened by accident. Then the office phone rang down the hall. He stepped back. I let go. Third almost. No second. Count. Chapter 4 throat touch. Chapter 5 wrist. And maybe pantry. Build more later. He crossed to the desk and answered. I watched the color drain, not from his face but into it, setting hard. When he hung up, the room seemed smaller. What is it? He looked at me a long time before speaking. Your brother took money from a shell account linked to my family. My breath caught. No, we traced the transfer tonight. You said you thought he found something, that's different. It is. His voice went flat. Until it is. No, I shook my head too fast. Nico steals cigarettes and parking signs and my clean aprons. He does not steal from men like you. Men like me, the words held no offense, only fatigue. You know what I mean. Yes, he said. That's what worries me. I backed away from the desk. You think my brother used me? I think your brother loved you. He paused. And I think those two things may no longer cancel each other out. That hurt because it sounded possible. The radio cracked then, Paolo's voice, breathless. Boss. We caught a signal from the East Road. Burner phone, could be Rinaldi men. Rinaldi, the name landed wrong. I had heard it twice in passing. A rival family. A threat at the edge of every unfinished sentence. Dante reached for his jacket. Stay in the kitchen until Giulia comes for you. I'm not porcelain. No, he said, eyes on mine. Your leverage. He left before I could answer. At dawn, Nino found me still at the table with Nico's recipe book open and my brother's numbers blurring under my exhausted eyes. He set a mug of coffee in front of me and sighed theatrically. I was going to marry for peace and olive groves. Instead, I work for emotionally constipated men with gun problems. I stared into the mug. Do you think my brother betrayed them? Nino's humor faded. I think desperate people make ugly bargains. I think clever people believe they can outplay monsters. I think your brother may have been both. Helpful. I'm on no sleep. This is my wise phase. I looked down at the code and saw it then, a notation in Nico's margin I had dismissed as a stain. Not a stain. A tiny drawn cross beside one date. A chapel mark. Our father's old habit for trust. The date matched a scheduled family meeting at the villa. And suddenly I knew the betrayal wasn't at the docks. It was coming to dinner. I found Dante on the chapel steps, with dawn still unfinished around him. The villa's small chapel sat apart from the main house, beyond a courtyard of cracked stone and white roses that only opened properly in the early cool. The sea air reached there thinner, salted and clean. Church bells from the city rolled faintly over the hills like memory. He was seated on the lowest step, elbows on his knees, suit jacket discarded beside him, shirt sleeves rolled once. Not praying, not smoking. Just existing with the kind of stillness that looked peaceful until you stood close enough to feel how much force it took. The silver lighter rested in his hand. He heard me before I spoke. Of course he did. You should be asleep. So should you. I wasn't the one decoding ambushes in pastry margins. I came down the path anyway. Nico marked the meeting date with a chapel cross. He only used that symbol for people he trusted. Dante lifted his gaze to me. Tiredness shadowed it, but the danger was still there under the fatigue. And if he marked someone in your house with trust, then the trap is inside the villa. Tonight, not someday. He stood in one smooth motion. Who? I don't know yet. Then you came here with half an answer. It's more than you had 10 minutes ago. For one reckless beat, something like approval flickered through his expression. He killed it immediately. Get dressed, he said. You'll stay with Maria during the meeting. No, his eyes narrowed. Alba, there's your answer again, I said, stepping closer than I should have. No, you don't understand what this room becomes when men decide blood is efficient. Then make me useful before they do. The words hung there between us, too raw to be strategic. He looked at me for so long I heard my own pulse. Then he reached out and touched a streak of flour still on my wrist from the dough I had abandoned downstairs. His thumb brushed it once. White against my skin, that was the third time he stopped himself. Because his gaze dropped to my mouth, because my breath changed, because the chapel suddenly felt too small for air, and he let his hand fall away. Fine, he said roughly. You stay. But you do exactly what I say. I should have won something by that. Instead, it felt like losing a private battle I had only half understood. The meeting began at dusk. Tommaso Rinaldi arrived with the polished ease of a man who had spent his life making danger look civilized. Early 40s, tailored gray suit, dark hair touched elegantly with silver at the temples. He was handsome in the way old paintings of fallen saints were handsome, composed enough to make the damage interesting. He kissed Maria's hand in the kitchen, complimented Nino's tie. Smiled at Paolo like they had survived adolescence together. When his gaze landed on me, it sharpened. And this, he said, must be the baker. Dante answered before I could. She's not for discussion. Tommaso's brows lifted just slightly. That serious? No, Dante's voice stayed level. That clear. If I had not been standing there, I might have missed the change in Tommaso's face. Not offense. Recognition. Like he had just found a seam in a wall he meant to pull apart later. The dinner lasted 40 unbearable minutes. Men ate sea bass and said little. Glassware caught candlelight. No one mentioned the docks. No one said the word betrayal. The entire table was built out of things unsaid. I watched hands instead of faces. Who reached first? Who paused? Who touched a glass and did not drink? Tommaso never salted his food. My brother had once written in the ledger margin beside a shipment date, "TR hates salt. Trust the sweet instead." My stomach turned over. When coffee came, Tommaso lifted his cup with his left hand. The same hand I had seen in the margin sketch of a ring, square black stone. He wore it now. I made the mistake then. A real one, costly. Human, I looked at Dante too fast. Tommaso saw. It happened all at once after that. He smiled into his coffee. Dante's hand moved under the table. Paolo stiffened by the door. Tommaso set down his cup very gently and said, "You should have sent her away the moment she learned to read your ghosts." Then the lights died. Gunfire exploded in the dark. Someone shouted my name. Not Sierra, Alba. The room became noise and splintering wood. I dropped beneath the table as glass shattered overhead. Men cursed in Italian. A chair crashed. I heard Nino somewhere to my left saying, with remarkable indignation, "This is why no one enjoys family dinners." Strong hands closed around my waist and pulled me hard against a chest I knew before the world caught up. Dante, he shoved me behind the overturned credenza as bullets punched plaster where I had been. "Stay down." "I'm sorry," I gasped. His face flashed into view in the intermittent emergency lights from the hall. Not angry, not yet, focused so completely it made fear feel secondary. "Later." He was gone before I could answer. The firefight lasted less than 2 minutes. It felt like a lifetime held underwater. When it stopped, the silence rang. Tommaso had vanished through the service corridor, taking 2 men and whatever remained of plausible loyalty with him. Paolo was bleeding from the shoulder. One of Dante's guards was dead by the window, with surprise still frozen on his face. Maria stood over Nino with a carving knife, daring anyone to tell her she shouldn't have one. I was shaking when Dante found me in the corridor outside the pantry. "You disobeyed," he said. "So did you said Maria." "This isn't a debate." I should have apologized. Instead what came out was, "I saw the ring." His whole expression changed. "What?" "The margin note, 'TR hates salt, trust the sweet instead.'" My breath hitched. "I looked at you and he knew I knew." "I'm sorry." Dante stared at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw his control crack in a way that had nothing to do with temper. Not because of the mistake. Because I was alive to confess it. He stepped in close so suddenly I stopped breathing. One hand came up to the side of my face, blood and all, not gentle exactly. Careful in a way that cost him something. "You should have run," he said, voice low and ragged. "I know, but you stayed." There, in the corridor smelling of cordite and extinguished candles, I finally understood what frightened me most. It wasn't him. It was the way my body settled when he was near, as if some traitorous part of me had already chosen. His thumb brushed my cheekbone once. Then he leaned his forehead briefly against mine. The kiss didn't happen. That almost hurt more. When he stepped back, he closed his eyes for 1 second, a man sealing shut whatever had almost broken open. Dante had not let himself name it until the gunfire. Not attraction. That had been there in every pause, every restraint, every breath he took too carefully around her. It was simpler and far worse. He wanted her because she moved toward the wounded, because she looked at blood and reached out instead of away, because she had knelt in gravel and told a dying man to breathe like the word itself could build a bridge back to life. Bianca had called him before dawn. Serafina had answered dawn with both hands. That was the difference. That was the wound, and now Tommaso knew it too. War had arrived. War, I learned, did not begin with explosions. It began with absences. The fishmongers who usually greeted Nino at the market looked through him. A customs officer Dante had bought loyalty from for 6 years resigned by noon and vanished by 3. 2 supply trucks failed to reach the port. A priest who sometimes took envelopes from Maria for community repairs stopped answering the villa line. By the 3rd day after the dinner ambush, the house felt like a lung breathing around a knife. No one said Tommaso's name unless they had to. That frightened me more than hearing it would have. I spent my mornings in the kitchen with Maria and my afternoons in the study with ledgers spread across the desk. Trying to read my brother's patterns faster than the men around me could prepare for being betrayed by them. Paolo hovered near doors when I worked. Giulia brought coffee and said little. Nino brought unsolicited observations and said everything. At this point, he announced one afternoon while balancing 2 cappuccinos and a plate of almond biscuits on my ledger stack, if I survive all of this, I'm opening a beach shack. No guns, no codes. Just grilled octopus and lies. Who would run it with you? I asked. He glanced toward the kitchen where Maria was arguing with a butcher over the phone. His expression softened into something embarrassingly sincere. The woman who will eventually understand that my cholesterol is her romantic obstacle. I laughed before I could stop myself. Then Paolo smiled from the doorway, and for a moment the war loosened. That evening Dante took me to the harbor. I should say I insisted. That would be truer. A coded note in Nico's ledger pointed to berth 17 and a shipment labeled ceramic tile. Dante was already moving men to intercept it when I said the notation beside it. Fragile top, soft center, was my brother's private joke for contraband hidden under something breakable. If there was proof linking Tommaso to the shell accounts, it would be there. You stay here, Dante said. No, his jaw tightened. You are not coming to a potentially armed exchange. I'm the one who understands the code. I understand bullets perfectly well without your help. I'm not afraid of bullets. His gaze turned very. Still, that is not the reassurance you think it is. Nino, standing nearby with keys in hand, muttered, I'm afraid of bullets and low-fat yogurt. Some things are healthy to fear. In the end, I went because I refused to yield and because Dante ran out of time to fight me properly. The harbor at night was all sodium light and black water. Cranes loomed like bent skeletons over the docks. Diesel hung in the air thick enough to taste. Men moved between containers in hard silhouettes, pretending this was business and not preparation for blood. Berth 17 sat near the edge of the older pier. Broken concrete, rusted chains. Waves slapping the pilings below. Paolo cut open the crate-marked tile. Under 2 neat rows of ceramic squares lay vacuum-sealed packages and a metal cash box. Bingo, Nino whispered reverently, then ruined it by adding, I hate that I'm good at crime. Dante took the box. Inside were account sheets, burner phones, and a small envelope addressed in my brother's hand. For Sierra, if I fail, my fingers went numb. I reached for it. Dante held it a fraction too long before letting go. Inside was one folded page. I'm sorry. I thought I could pull money long enough to expose the root without getting us both buried. If Dante Salvator has this too, then trust one thing, Tommaso doesn't want the ports. He wants Dante broken first. Don't let him use you for the last part. My chest caved in around the words. Nico was trying to warn you, I said. Dante's face didn't soften, but something in it lowered. Yes. A shot cracked from the container stack. Paolo shoved me down. The second shot took him high in the ribs. Everything broke. Men scattered. Return fire lit the dock in violent white bursts. Nino cursed so creatively I would have laughed in another universe. Dante dragged me behind a forklift with one arm while firing with the other, calm as winter. Paolo hit the concrete hard 3 feet away. Paolo! I crawled toward him before anyone could stop me. His blood was hot through my hands. Too much. My breath came short and sharp. Not again. Not this shape, not this floor, not this impossible bargain with time. Stay with me, I said. He tried to smile. You always say that. Because you keep getting shot. His laugh broke into a cough. Dante dropped to one knee beside us. Gunfire snapped overhead. He pressed his hand over Paolo's wound with brutal efficiency. Nino, car. "I hate this job," Nino yelled back. That was when I saw it, a clear path behind the containers, a service gate hanging open onto the outer road. Dark, unwatched for one impossible second. An exit, a real one. I could have run. I knew the shape of the gate, the slope of the road beyond it, the smell of the sea opening toward the city. No one had a hand on me. Dante's attention was on Paolo. The war was loud enough to swallow footsteps. Freedom stood 20 yards away. Then Paolo's fingers caught weakly at my sleeve, and I knew exactly what his world cost. Not conceptually. Not in stories, in blood under my hands. In men with bad jokes and kind eyes collapsing because they had stood too near the man I could not stop orbiting. If I left, I might still survive. If I stayed, I chose this. Fully, open-eyed, no innocence of ignorance left to me. "Go," Paolo whispered. He had seen the gate too. I looked at Dante. His profile was cut from shadow and gunmetal, focused entirely on keeping another man alive. He never asked me to stay. That mattered. Something inside me broke cleanly then, not into fear. Into decision. I tore a strip from my blouse and packed it harder against Paolo's side. Not leaving. His eyes widened, then closed briefly in relief or pain, maybe both. The shooting moved farther down the pier as Dante's men pushed the attackers back. Nino brought the SUV screaming to the curb. Giulia jumped out before it stopped moving. We got Paolo into the back. I climbed in beside him and held pressure all the way to the villa, while he drifted in and out, and Nino drove like death, was a rumor he intended to outrun. At the gates, Dante caught my wrist before I could follow Paolo inside. "You had a road," he said quietly. I didn't pretend not to understand. "Yes, and..." I looked at the blood on both of us. At the house beyond him, at the life behind me dissolving one choice at a time, and I came back. His throat moved, that was all. Later, after Giulia stitched Paolo and Maria force-fed me broth with the authority of a field marshal, I stood alone in my room and packed a bag. Not to leave, to move downstairs. I folded away the dress I had arrived in, took off the tiny gold cross my mother had given me, and set it in the drawer because I could not bear to lose it in this world. Put on one of Maria's spare kitchen aprons over my clothes and tied it tight. A costume change, a surrender, a choice. When I opened the door, Dante was there. He looked at the bag in my hand. At the apron, at me. "You're not going," he said. "No." He exhaled once through his nose, almost a laugh and nothing like one. "This will cost you." "I know." "What?" I thought about the bakery over our old shop, the possibility of clean mornings, the version of myself that believed love and danger had separate addresses. "My old life," I said. His gaze held mine for a long, unbearable second. Then he took the bag from my hand and carried it downstairs himself. I followed. I was no longer trapped. That should have felt better. It didn't. It felt final. Choosing to stay did not make me brave, it made me visible. That was the first truth Chapter 8 taught me. The second was worse. Once you choose a darkness with open eyes, it begins asking things of you. The villa had changed after the harbor attack. Guards doubled at the perimeter. Windows that had once stood open to let in sea air were latched by sunset. Dante moved through the house like a man counting losses before they happened. Paolo survived, barely, and spent 2 days half-conscious under Giulia's supervision, muttering apologies to no one. Nino brought him contraband pistachio gelato and acted like this was medicine. Maria caught him and said she hoped he developed morals before diabetes. I stayed near the study because code gave panic somewhere to go. Nico's notebook yielded piece by piece under pressure. Shell companies, altered cargo manifests, chapel marks beside the names of men who could be trusted for one thing and sold for another. Tommaso had built a web inside Dante's world by understanding its loyalties better than anyone else. That was what made him dangerous, not greed, intimacy. He knew where Dante kept the tender things because he had once stood close enough to watch him hide them. On the second night after the harbor, Dante came into the study near midnight and found me asleep over a ledger. He woke me by lifting the fountain pen from my hand. I blinked up at him, disoriented. Did I miss something? Yes, he said. A bed. I straightened too fast, my neck ached. I found another route, the old ferry terminal. You can tell me tomorrow. I rubbed my face. If I sleep, I'll forget the order. You won't. His hand came to the back of my chair, not touching me, close enough that I noticed anyway, almost. I made this worse, I said quietly. At the dinner, if I hadn't looked at you, you did not make Tommaso what he is. No, but I gave him proof. Dante was silent for a moment. Then, yes. The honesty hurt and steadied me at once. I'm not forgiving that quickly, he added. I looked up. I know. His gaze dropped to my mouth, then my tired eyes, then away. Go to sleep, Alba. The warmth in the nickname startled me because it wasn't warmth yet, just less cold, which somehow felt more dangerous. The next morning, I made my mistake. Tommaso sent flowers. White peonies in a cheap crystal vase with a card that said only, "Your brother trusted sweet things too much. I wonder if you will." Maria wanted to burn them. Nino wanted to poison them, though he admitted he didn't know how one poisoned flowers and would need to research. I should have handed the note directly to Dante. Instead, I kept it. Because I wanted one thing to be mine to solve. Because some bruised, furious part of me hated being protected from every answer. Because I was tired of being leverage and evidence and a reason for men to bleed. That afternoon, the card's watermark led me to a stationer near the old cathedral. A stupid clue, a thin clue. Enough to tempt someone who wanted agency more than safety. I told Giulia I was going to the chapel courtyard. Then I slipped through the side garden and out a servant's gate. Nina had once complained never latched properly because this household does not respect the complexity of hinges. The stationer was closed. Of course it was. The alley behind it was not. I made it 3 steps before a van door opened. A cloth came over my mouth. Bitter chemical, panic, hands. I fought harder than they expected. Landed an elbow, bit someone, heard swearing, then darkness folded. When I woke, I was tied to a chair in a room that smelled of damp concrete and old cigarettes. No windows, single bulb. Water dripping somewhere beyond the wall with mechanical patience. The darkest room, the title kind. Tommaso sat across from me in his shirt sleeves, reading my brother's note like a man revisiting scripture. You look disappointed, he said without glancing up. I'm trying not to vomit. A fair response to my decorating choices. He rose and came nearer. Up close, he looked less polished than at the villa, tired around the mouth, eyes gone hollow at the edges. A man who had spent too long mistaking victory for revenge. You were easier to take than I hoped, he said. I'm flattered. His mouth twitched. You and he are more alike than either of you understands. I said nothing. Do you know why Dante is dangerous? Tommaso asked. Not because he kills. Many men kill. It's because he denies himself almost everything except control. Men like that build religions around the one thing they cannot manage to stop wanting. My pulse betrayed me. I hated that he saw. He crouched to my eye level. You! I looked at the far wall. You overestimate me. No. His tone softened unexpectedly. I underestimate him less than anyone alive. That was the mirror, I saw it then. Tommaso was what Dante could become if grief stopped hardening into discipline and melted instead into entitlement. A man who had loved power because it let him touch loss without feeling helpless. A man who had once probably called cruelty strategy. Why? I asked. If you wanted the ports, you could have taken them cleaner. Tommaso smiled without humor. Because he let Bianca die. The name hit me like ice. He told her to wait, Tommaso said. 12 minutes, I was there after, I heard the recording. Do you understand what that does to a man who thinks himself god of outcomes? I stared at him. Listener knows more now, heroine didn't know before. You were there, I whispered. I built his worst years with him, Tommaso said. Then he decided remorse made him moral. The room turned under me. All this time, the villain had not wanted money first. He had wanted Dante forced to watch another dawn fail. Tommaso touched the edge of the rope binding my wrist. You should know something before he comes. I never meant to kill you. That's comforting. I meant to make him choose. The door opened behind him, not Dante, Giulia. For one disorienting second, I thought rescue had come in a shape I trusted. Then I saw the gun in her hand and the dead look in her face. My stomach dropped. "Move," she told Tommaso. He stepped aside. The traitor was Tommaso alone. It was the woman who brought coffee, the woman who bandaged wounds. The woman who knew where I slept and what door latched badly and which route to the city avoided cameras. Wait, real wait, I looked at her. Why? Her jaw clenched. Because your men killed my brother 10 years ago and called it balance. Your men, I said, and she flinched because that was the point. She had lived too long in a house where pronouns had become treason. Tommaso handed her the pliers from the table with exquisite calm. We start with fingers if he stalls. Giulia's hand shook once, then steadied. I lifted my chin. I was innocent, yes, but I did not break. When she came toward me, I drove the chair backward with all my weight. It crashed to the floor, the bulb swinging overhead. The pliers skidded away. I hit concrete hard enough to see white. Tommaso swore. Giulia moved. And somewhere above us, far off and sudden, I heard the first gunshots. It was too late. The first thing I understood was that rescue had a sound, not sirens. Not shouting. A door giving way under force so absolute it stopped being wood and became weather. Chaos rushed into the room above me, boots, gunfire, a man screaming, someone barking orders in Sicilian too fast for fear to translate. Giulia spun toward the stairs. Tommaso drew his weapon with the elegance of long practice. I lay on my side on the concrete floor with my wrists half numb and the chair legs twisted behind me, heart beating so hard I thought it might split the rope. This was the moment in stories when the girl waits. I didn't. Giulia had dropped the pliers when I tipped the chair. They lay 6 inches from my bound hands. I rolled, shoulder screaming, fingers scrabbling over concrete until cold metal caught in my grip. Awkward, slippery, good enough. Tommaso saw too late. I cut one strand of rope, then another. The door burst open. Dante entered like judgment. No raised voice, no grand declaration, just lethal focus and a darkness so tightly controlled it was almost holy. Behind him, Paolo came in pale and furious with his arms strapped tight, and Nino, impossibly, absurdly, followed with a gun in one hand and a muttered prayer in the other. "Dear Lord," he said, "if this ends with me dead in a warehouse, let Maria at least cry convincingly." Gallienus fired first. Dante answered. The room exploded. I got one hand free and threw myself behind the fallen chair as plaster spat from the wall. Giulia aimed for Dante, and Paolo tackled her from the side with a roar I felt in my ribs. They went down hard. Tommaso backed through the inner door toward the stairs to the roof. Dante followed without hesitation. "Stay with her," he snapped, as if I was capable of doing anything else. As if any human on earth could have kept him from that stairwell. Paolo pinned Giulia against the floor, breath ragged, blood already darkening his bandage again. She fought like someone past fear, past reason. I crawled toward them, rope still hanging from one wrist. "Paolo, cut it," he hissed. Nino landed beside me on one knee, somehow both terrified and efficient. I always knew my cardio would matter in a crisis. Tragic day. He sliced the rest of my bonds with a pocket knife. Upstairs, gunfire thundered again. I looked at Paolo holding Giulia down and saw the conflict wrecking his face. He knew her, trusted her. Maybe loved her in some quieter way people in houses like this rarely admitted. Betrayal had real weight because affection had come first. "Go," he told me. I stood on legs that barely remembered me and ran for the stairs. Rain hit my face the second I reached the roof. The building opened onto a flat concrete platform ringed by low walls and rusted railings. The city beyond it blurred under storm and sodium light. Water slicked the surface. Wind tore at my hair. Somewhere far below, men shouted in the courtyard. Dante and Tommaso were locked in motion near the ledge, both bleeding now, neither slowing. Tommaso fought like he knew Dante's body as well as his own. Anticipated angles, cut off retreats. He was the mirror made flesh. Everything efficient in Dante echoed back at him stripped of restraint. Then I saw the second gun lying near the drain, kicked loose in the fight. I reached it first. Tommaso turned at the scrape of my shoe. His attention broke. 1 second, barely, enough. Dante drove him into the wall hard enough to crack brick. The gun in my hand felt monstrous. Too heavy, too real. "Don't," Tommaso said to me, and I hated that his voice held no fear for himself, only curiosity. "If you shoot me, you become part of this forever." Rain ran into my mouth. I tasted rust and storm. "I already am," I whispered, but I didn't fire. That mattered too. Instead, I slid the weapon across the roof toward Dante with all the force I had. Tommaso lunged. Dante caught the gun first and struck him across the temple with the butt. Tommaso staggered to one knee by the railing. Everything paused. Rain, breath, blood. Tommaso laughed once, dazed and sad. "There he is." Dante stood over him, chest heaving, gun aimed, and absolutely steady. "You want me to beg?" Tommaso asked. "No, you owe me more than this." At that, something changed in Dante's face. "Not mercy, never that simple. Memory. You told her to wait," Tommaso said softly, and I understood with horror that this was the old wound opened by another hand. "Just 12 minutes. That's all." Dante's arm did not move. His voice, when it came, was quieter than rain. "And I have paid for everyone since." Tommaso smiled like a man who had finally reached the center of his own ruin. "Then pay one more." He moved. Dante fired. Tommaso hit the concrete and did not rise. The sound seemed to leave the city all at once. I stood frozen with rain in my eyes and Dante's breathing in my ears. Then his gaze found me, and whatever had kept him standing shifted. He crossed the roof in 3 strides and caught my face between both hands, blood and rain and shaking all of it. "Look at me." I did. His composure was gone, not in pieces, in ash. "Are you hurt?" I wanted to say no. Instead, the truth came out small and exposed. "I thought you were too late." For one fractured second his eyes closed. Then he kissed me, not hard, not hungry in the way stories promise, desperate, careful. Like something starved finally touching water, and not trusting it to remain. His mouth met mine, and I felt every restraint he had used on himself like separate living things breaking quietly apart. I didn't know how to answer at first. I only knew I didn't want the distance back, so I touched his coat with both hands, held on, let him feel I was there. When he drew away, our foreheads stayed together in the rain. "Say something," he said, voice rough. I was shaking so badly my teeth almost clicked. "I don't know what this is." Neither do I. It should have frightened me. Instead, it made the ground return. Below us, footsteps pounded the stairwell. Nino's voice rose through the storm. "If either of you are dying, please schedule it after I sit down." I laughed then, a broken little sound, and immediately cried at the same time. I hated that. Dante looked at the tears as if they were personal injuries. "Alba," he said. The nickname was different now, not possession, not observation, anchor. He pulled me against him, one hand at the back of my head, and for the first time since the gate, I let myself lean fully into the safety that disturbed me. Not because his world had become less dark. Because I had seen him inside it and found, to my own terror, that I trusted the part of him grief had not managed to kill. In the stairwell below, Paolo called for a medic. Giulia was alive. Tommaso was not. The war would end, but not cleanly. Never cleanly. Dante held me through the rain like a man learning the shape of relief by force, and I understood one last cruel thing. If he asked, I would stay forever. Victory did not feel victorious. It felt like paperwork and funerals and the smell of bleach in corridors where blood had dried in the grout. Tommaso's death shattered his side of the war, but not the machinery under it. Men who had sold him information now sold panic instead. Accounts had to be frozen. Shipments rerouted. 2 warehouses torched by retreating allies. One judge paid twice as much to remember old loyalties. Palermo kept breathing because cities do, but the Salvator world moved through its days with the bruised precision of a body healing around broken ribs. And Giulia lived. That was the part I had not expected to hurt. Paolo visited her under guard in the downstairs room where they kept the shutters half closed and the lamp low. I brought soup once because Maria made me and because I needed to see whether I hated her properly. I didn't. I hated what she had done. I hated how much of it I understood, which was worse. She looked at the tray in my hands and then at me. You shouldn't be kind. I'm not, I said. Maria says soup is non-negotiable. That almost made her smile. Almost still ruled too much of my life. Dante was everywhere and nowhere in those days, beside me at breakfast, gone by noon. Returning after midnight with tired eyes and bloodless cuffs, and that terrible economy of movement, intact, even when exhaustion bent the edges. He kissed me only once in the 3 days after the roof, in the dark pantry while the house slept, and his hand trembled against the doorjamb before it steadied. Then he stepped back and said my name like a warning to himself. Third restraint after intimacy. It's okay, we need mature warm later. On the 4th night the last battle came to us, not by design. By inevitability. A convoy carrying records seized from Tommaso's accounts was ambushed on the western road. One surviving driver limped back with a message. A remnant crew had taken position at the old salt warehouse outside the city and were threatening to burn the ledgers unless Dante came in person. A trap, Paolo said from the study doorway, shoulder stiff but healing. Yes, Dante said. Nino lifted a finger. Counterpoint, still rude. I stood by the desk with the rescued account files stacked under my palm. They want him there because there's something in these records Tommaso didn't get to bury. Dante looked at me. And if they burn them, all of this becomes another story rich men survive. His expression gave nothing away, but I saw the decision arrive before he spoke. You stay here. I was getting tired of those 3 words. No, Paolo rubbed his face. Madonna, Nino sighed. I long for simpler times, cholesterol, traffic. Unrequited love. Dante's gaze held mine. This ends tonight. Then we end it together. Something hot flashed in his eyes, not anger exactly, something harder because it had fear inside it. He came around the desk and stopped close enough that I felt his body heat before he touched me. If you stand beside me in that warehouse, he said quietly, you may see something you cannot forgive. I swallowed. I already have, and I'm still here. The silence that followed felt like a door on the hinge. Then he nodded once. We drove out under a sky the color of old tin. The salt warehouse sat beyond the abandoned marsh flats, where the ground went white in summer and mean in winter. Tonight the wind carried brine and rust, and the building itself looked half-collapsed under a broken roofline. Inside, the air tasted of dust and old minerals. Salt clung to the floor in pale crusts. Men moved in the high shadows between conveyor frames and dead machinery. The firefight began before words did. This time I knew what to do. Stay low. Count exits. Don't freeze just because noise wants you to. Paolo led left flank. Nino somehow drove the second SUV through a side door when one route collapsed, screaming, I'm too pretty for martyrdom. Maria would have called the driving vulgar. I called it timely. I found the office platform above the main floor, and the lockbox Tommaso's men were trying to drag toward a fuel drum. Nico's final route sheets. Proof. Names. A gunman reached the stairs at the same time I did. I hit him with the metal ledger case. I do not tell that proudly. It made a sound I still hear sometimes. He went down. The case split. Papers exploded into the air like pale birds. Below, Dante turned at the noise. A second shooter rose behind him from the shadow of a conveyor belt. Dante, he pivoted on my shout, fired first. Too late to avoid the bullet entirely. He staggered, not far enough. The world narrowed. I went down the stairs without remembering my feet. Reached him as Paolo, and 2 others closed around the remaining gunmen. Dante had one hand braced to the floor, blood spreading dark beneath the other side of his jacket. No, I said. His mouth twitched impossibly. Compelling argument. Don't. My hands shook as I pressed the wound. He caught my wrist. Listen. No, Alba. That stopped me, always. If they get to the fuel, he said through clenched teeth, burn the west wall and go. No heroics. Don't tell me what to do while bleeding. a burst of automatic fire cut across the warehouse. Then Paolo shouted that the shooters were down. Nino, from somewhere behind a forklift, yelled, "I found the keys to a forklift, and I am now more dangerous than emotionally appropriate." Even then, even there, I laughed through tears. Dante heard it, his grip on my wrist loosened. "Good," he murmured. "What?" "That," I stared at him. "What? You still do it." The words hit somewhere deep and soft and terrified. "Do what?" But before I could ask, Paolo reached us with Giacomo, the medic from the villa. They got pressure on the wound and half-carried Dante outside while the others secured the papers. The remaining attackers surrendered when they realized Tommaso's ghost wasn't coming to save them. On the salt road under a violent, opening sky, I stood beside the ambulance van and watched men load the last boxes of evidence into the convoy. Wind tugged at my hair. My hands were red again. The war had cost us a guard, 2 warehouses, whatever remained of Giulia's future in the house, and one final piece of the man Dante had been before Bianca died. He had killed Tommaso not only to win, but to survive what Tommaso knew of him. That cost would not reverse. An hour later, in the villa infirmary with dawn threatening the horizon, Dante woke to find me in the chair beside his bed. His voice was threadbare. "Still here." I took his hand carefully because he was attached to too many lines to hold him properly. "Yes." He looked at our joined hands, then at me. The silver lighter sat on the bedside table where Paolo must have left it with his other things. Dante reached for it, flicked it once. Click, a breath, a release. A man proving he was still in the room. Then he looked at me and said, "It is over." I believed him, not because the world was suddenly safe. Because this particular violence had finally run out of doors. Recovery was not romantic. It smelled like antiseptic and bitter coffee, and the stale linen scent of rooms kept too warm for healing. Dante was terrible at being injured. He obeyed Giacomo only when threatened by Maria, who wielded broth and insults with equal authority. Paolo improved enough to take short walks on the south terrace and complain about everyone's choices. Nino capitalized on the fragile peace by baking himself back into terrible dietary shape under Maria's supervision, which he called our domestic arrangement until she threw a wooden spoon at his head. The first ordinary morning arrived by accident. I was in the kitchen before sunrise shaping brioche knots while rain tapped softly at the windows. Maria had gone to the market with Nino, which meant half the staff would be overcharged and charm-bullied before breakfast. The radio played low. Butter warmed in a pan. The villa, for once, felt like a house before it felt like a fortress. I sensed him before I heard him. Then came the click. I turned. Dante stood in the doorway in a dark sweater instead of a suit, one arm still bandaged under the wool. He looked less like a Don that way and more dangerous for it somehow, stripped of formality, left only with presence. "You're supposed to be resting," I said. "You're supposed to stop saying that like it works." I looked back at the dough because looking at him too long in a quiet kitchen felt unsafe in an entirely new direction. "Coffee?" I asked. "Yes," I poured. He watched my hands. That more than anything made me nervous. Not when he ordered men into motion, not when he entered a room and silence followed. When he watched my hands as if they mattered independently of the blood they had once stopped. I slid the cup toward him. He took it with his uninjured hand. "What did you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice careful, "when you said I still do it?" He was silent long enough that I thought he might not answer. Then he set the cup down. "The gate," he said. "Paolo bleeding, you stopped." I didn't move. "The harbor, the warehouse. Every time there's blood, fear, a reason to save yourself." His gaze lifted to mine. "You still move toward the person who needs you." The kitchen went very still around us. "You noticed that." I noticed it first. Something in my chest hurt quietly. "That's why?" I asked. Not why me exactly. I couldn't make my mouth shape something so naked, but he heard it anyway. "Yes." No speech, no poetry, just truth set down with care. "In my world," he said, "mercy usually arrives with an invoice. You never ask for one." I had no answer to that, not a useful one, so I said the wrong thing. That seems like poor business. His laugh came low and brief and so rare it changed the room. Almost, he stepped closer. I stood my ground only because there was a table behind me. You should know something too, he said. What? When I told Bianca to wait 12 minutes, I was in a meeting with Tommaso. His jaw tightened once. I thought control meant choosing the larger fire. I have hated myself for being wrong every day since. Pain went through me, not because I could fix it, but because I couldn't. I touched his sleeve before I thought better of it. You were wrong, I said softly. That's not the same as not loving her. His eyes closed for one beat. When they opened, they were darker. This time, when he kissed me, there was no gunfire to interrupt it and no rain to excuse it. Only morning, dough on my hands, coffee on his breath, and the quiet knowledge of everything we had already survived. I let him come to me. That mattered. I answered slowly, uncertainly, because certainty would have been a lie. His mouth softened when mine did. His hand found my waist and stayed there, warm and steady, giving me all the room in the world to step back. I didn't. When he finally drew away, my forehead tipped to his shoulder because standing suddenly felt like advanced mathematics. Say something, he murmured into my hair. I'm making terrible life choices. Probably, I laughed against his sweater. That was not comforting. It wasn't meant to be. By afternoon, the house had heard enough through walls and intuition to become unbearable. Nino bowed when I entered the kitchen and said, "At last." The Republic has recognized what the monarchy could not. Maria smacked him with a dish towel. Stop narrating other people's faces. Paolo, leaning in the doorway with one arm in a sling, looked happier than was strictly dignified. About time. I glared at all of them. None of you know anything. Nino clutched his chest. Madam, this villa runs exclusively on dangerous information and soup. 2 weeks later. Dante took me to the olive grove above the eastern wall, where the old trees twisted up from the soil like patient hands. The late afternoon sun turned everything honey-colored. Palermo glittered in the distance. The air smelled of dry grass and leaves, and the sea waiting beyond the hills. He walked more slowly now, not from weakness but recovery. I adjusted my pace without making it obvious. He noticed anyway. Dante noticed everything. At the center of the grove, there was a stone bench and a view wide enough to make silence feel less crowded. He stopped there and reached into his coat. My heart misfired. Before you decide this is sentimental, he said, I should mention Nino helped choose the wording. That is not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. He held out a small box, not velvet. Matte black, severe enough to be his. Inside lay a ring, old gold, oval diamond, delicate despite itself. I stared. This is not a fairy tale, he said. You know too much to let me insult you with one. His voice stayed low, economical, but I heard the cost in it. I cannot offer safety. I can offer truth, my name, and the certainty that if you stay, no decision touching your life will ever again be made without your voice in it. I looked up at him. The olive leaves shifted softly overhead. Dante, if you want the bakery restored, it will be. If you want a house in the city and distance from mine, I'll build the distance and cross it only when invited. His gaze held mine without flinching. If you want to walk away, I will let you. The last promise undid me more than the others, because he meant it. I don't know how to do this neatly, I whispered. Good, a shadow of warmth touched his mouth. Neither do I thought of the gate, the harbor, Paolo's blood, Nino's terrible timing, Maria's bread, Bianca's 12 lost minutes. The way this man's violence had never frightened me as much as his tenderness. Then I thought of the life I had already chosen. Yes, I said, the word came out shaky. Honest, mine. He exhaled once, as if a whole private weather system in him had finally shifted. When he slid the ring onto my finger, his thumb lingered on my knuckle. Alba, he said. The nickname was full now. Warm, earned, home altered into language, I looked at the ring, then at him. You know that still sounds possessive. It is, he said, just not cold anymore. The sun slipped lower. Somewhere below, Nino shouted because Maria had apparently discovered his hidden biscuits again. I started laughing before I could help it. Dante watched me with a look I would spend the rest of my life trying not to build rooms around. The grove held us. The city waited. Nothing about the world was ordinary. And still, somehow, this moment was. 9 months later, I woke before dawn to the smell of oranges and yeast. For one quiet second, I didn't know where I was. Then the familiar weight of linen, the cool sweep of morning air through the cracked balcony door, and the low murmur of waves beyond the hill settled me back into the life I had chosen. Our life. The bakery reopened in late spring under a new sign, Belly and Alba according to Nino, who insisted the name was branding genius, and still looked offended every time Maria reminded him she had not approved this level of creativity. In the end, the official sign simply said Belly, as my father would have wanted. But in the villa kitchen, on the invoices, in the notes Dante left pinned beneath the sugar tin, Alba appeared often enough to become another kind of name for home. The villa had changed too. Not into safety. That would have been a lie. Men still came and went at odd hours. The West Wing still stayed locked during certain conversations. Paolo still walked with a slight pull in bad weather. Giulia was gone to a small house on the mainland funded quietly and permanently by Dante, because justice in his world had edges but not always cruelty. Tommaso was dead. Bianca remained dead. Some losses did not negotiate, but there was bread in the mornings now. Laughter, a ridiculous amount of arguing about olive oil. Nino and Maria still had not admitted whatever impossible thing existed between them, which meant everyone else in the house had become unwilling audience to a romance built entirely out of insults and contraband pastries. That morning, I tied on an apron and went downstairs to start the dough before the drivers arrived. The kitchen was dark except for the stove light. Flour ghosted the table in pale drifts. Copper pans shone softly overhead. I reached for the sugar tin on the high shelf. A hand beat me to it. Warm fingers, steadier than memory, familiar enough that my pulse answered before I turned. Dante stood beside me in shirt sleeves, tie undone, dark hair still damp from the shower. He had returned late from the port and should have been asleep for at least another hour. Instead, he was here. Taking down sugar like a man participating in domestic life was not the most radical thing he had ever done. "You're up," I said. "So are you." That was my line. He set the tin on the table between us. "I got here first." I smiled despite myself. "You sound proud." "I am." The silver lighter clicked in his hand. Some habits never left him. Even now, he rarely lit the cigarette he sometimes carried. The sound had outlived the smoke. It had become punctuation. Proof. The small metallic note that opened 1,000 memories and no longer cut me when it did. "Did the meeting go badly?" I asked. "No." "Then why are you doing that?" He looked at the lighter, then tucked it away. "You'll laugh, probably. I heard you moving around upstairs and wanted to know where you were." Something soft and impossible moved through me. "That's ridiculous," I said. "Yes, and controlling. Yes, and a little alarming." At that, one corner of his mouth lifted. "Still here." There it was, the old question hidden in a newer one. I stepped closer. "Still here." I began measuring flour while he leaned against the counter and pretended not to watch me as openly as he did. Outside, the horizon was only beginning to pale. The first birds had not yet committed to morning. The kitchen belonged to us in that suspended hour. I reached for the orange zest and scraped the peel into the bowl. He said nothing. I felt his gaze anyway. "What?" I asked. "Nothing. That is never true with you." He let the silence stretch. "Then, you're doing it again." My hand stilled over the dough. "Doing what?" He pushed away from the counter and came around beside me, not crowding, near. "This," he said quietly. "You wake before the world and move toward the thing that needs your hands first." I looked down at the bowl because looking at him felt suddenly too exposed. The gate flashed through me. Paolo's blood, harbor wind, a roof in rain, salt roads, a kitchen after war. He had noticed the same thing then. He noticed it now. I laughed once unsteady. "It's only dough." "No." His voice gentled without losing its weight. "It's still you." That line went somewhere I couldn't defend. My throat tightened. You make ordinary things sound dangerous. They are. He took the spoon from my hand, set it aside, and touched the flower at my wrist, with his thumb the same way he had on the chapel steps months before. This is how people get attached to living. I looked up. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he reached past me for the zipper at the back of my apron, Maria's ridiculous new one, all practical straps and impossible fastenings, and drew it slowly up where it had caught halfway. The sound was soft, intimate, a simple motion transformed by memory and time. That was our motif returned differently. Not a gate, not a restraint, a fastening. A life arranged together by two people who had once only known how to survive separately. When he finished, his hand rested for one brief second at the nape of my neck. "Thank you," I whispered. He bent and kissed my temple. "Always, Alba." From the doorway, Nino groaned theatrically. "I'm begging both of you to either be less in love before coffee or pay me emotional damages." Maria appeared behind him, carrying a tray of lemons, and smacked the back of his head without slowing. "Down. If you spent half as much energy lifting flour sacks as you do complaining, I might love you myself." Nino froze. Paolo, behind them with a crate balanced on one hip, nearly dropped it laughing. Maria turned scarlet. "I meant tolerate, obviously." "Witnesses," Nino cried to the ceiling. "At last my suffering bears fruit." The kitchen broke into laughter. Even Dante, quiet and helplessly human, let it happen. And there it was, the ordinary life that once would have seemed impossible. Not clean, not innocent in the old way, but alive, chosen. Warm in places, I had once believed, would stay cold forever. Later, after the first trays went in and the house fully woke, Dante left for the port with a kiss to my knuckles and a warning to eat before noon. Paolo argued with a delivery man over invoices. Nino stole candied orange peels and got caught. Maria pretended not to smile. I worked. The sky turned from pearl to gold over Palermo. The day began. By afternoon, when the rush had thinned and the last order was boxed, I found a note tucked beneath the sugar tin in Dante's neat hand. "Tonight on the East Terrace. No guards, just us. Bring the orange tart." I stood there too long with the note in my flour-dusted fingers. The unresolved thread, I suppose, was not whether I loved him. I did, entirely. It was whether love can ever be pure when it is born in a violent house, whether choosing a man like Dante means accepting the damage his protection leaves in the world around him. I still don't know. Maybe that is the truest ending I can give you. He was waiting before dawn once, and I thought it meant captivity. Now when he waits, it means there is somewhere in this dark world I am expected, wanted, known. Would you have chosen Dante Salvator and let the old life burn for the one you built with him?